Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk F1. I'm Ishan, and today we'll be discussing about the driver market, the rise and fall of McLaren and the rise again, and a preview for Bahrain at the weekend. I'm here today with Akshar again and Raj.
Let's start by talking about the driver market, usually quite predictable until it comes to around silly season where reporters start concocting wild imaginations based on small clues. Raj, I know you had a lot to say about it when we were talking before, so what are your thoughts?
If we look at the W series, we look at the driver rotation system. I feel like it's definitely a good idea, but I'm a bit skeptical about the practicality of it. So one theme that has been a consensus in public opinion with the W series is that it's very difficult telling who is who, and it requires serious adjustment because an element of distinction is required. And even if we look at now today in the day and age of Formula One, it often takes a second look to see which member of the team it is. And if commentators who are doing that every week are looking to see which teammate it is, then imagine if it's a rotation of driver system where every week you have a different driver in a different car, and the only way to differentiate them would probably be their helmet, which is only visible on the close-up with the camera. So it could be pretty problematic. But if a pragmatic way of implementing it is thought of, then it could create a lot of movement up and down the grid. And this would make for exciting racing, because you could say that in today's day and age, with Hamilton dominating the way he is, we don't get as much of that exciting racing that we used to, as per se in previous years. But the rotation system also shows the deeply introverted nature of F1, I feel, and shows that it's a bit not predictable in my opinion, and a bit of reform wouldn't hurt. What do you guys think?
Well, what do I think? I think there's a system they have in the W Series that I think could be implemented into F1. I think would be good. It's that any driver that finishes outside the top 12 is eligible for the next season, but they're not guaranteed a place because the system they use is new applicants, and it depends how good the new applicants are. But I think they should try and implement a system with F2 drivers and younger drivers that are looking like they have the potential to push through. So drivers that aren't performing so well, there's more pressure on them to perform better, essentially, and it will lead to a more competitive season. Sorry.
Would you be okay with George Russell maybe losing his seat? Because he's not in the top 12.
If they implemented something similar, as in the lower performing driver out of the two, maybe. Just not George Russell.
I think he would be heartbroken.
Well, George Russell he's deserving of a Mercedes seat, but he's stuck at Williams, and he deserves better. I could get very passionate about this, but I won't, because I'll keep it civilized on the podcast. I could get very passionate about this, but I'm not going to.
I'm not sure about the W Series system, to be honest, because what Raj said is right. Sometimes when you watch a W Series race, it's a bit confusing who's who. And W Series is a spec series, so you can change the teams and cars and drivers around quite easily. For Formula One to be able to do that, all the teams need to be a lot closer together. Like right now, it wouldn't be fair for Hamilton to go into a championship fight and then he's in the Williams and Bottas is in the Mercedes. We all know that Bottas is not the better driver out of the two.
But I think in some ways it would work, but it would make F1 more individual rather than there's people obviously are big fans of Mercedes, big fans of McLarens and the traditionally more successful teams. But if they did that, yeah, it would be more suited towards people that are fans of individual drivers. So as it's positives and negatives, but as I say, I would prefer F1 if there was some way to implement a way of not punishing the worst performing driver, but giving them something to giving them a kick up the backside, I'd say.
Incentives.
Incentive, that's the word I was looking for.
Well, for incentives, there's another system as well. Raj might have an opinion on this. The IPL auction system. If that was brought in, wherein a team gets to retain one driver, but the second driver is down to an open auction, where the drivers set what they feel their value is, and then whichever team bids for the driver gets the driver. Because that would shake it up every year. Then we'd have a new rid every year.
That's problematic.
It works for IPL, doesn't it?
I feel that's definitely problematic. So I think that would be pretty problematic because in the IPL you have a team of 11 players, whereas in Formula One you only have the 2 drivers. So I feel like if you put one up for auction, then you are displaying an element of favoritism, because you're sort of saying that basically we think that he is the better driver and we think that you deserve to go up for the auction. And then if down the line that player at the auction does get retained, then he may not be as motivated to work as hard for that team because he feels like his work isn't rewarded, and they're not acknowledging of the fact that he's actually trying his best, because they're too focused on the other driver who they see. Every team has a main driver, but I feel like the extent to which that would sort of split the team in an essence, because you can't have 2 drivers and say that both are your favorite, but then you also can't go and put one up for auction to buy for another team and then hope in the hope that that driver's not brilliant, so we'll offload him.
Well, I think it could push both drivers to be better, because neither one's going to want to put up for auction, so they'll both be wanting to push harder to finish above each other every week, which I think it would create more aggressive racing, and that's what F1's been missing. So it would help, boost aggressiveness and excitingness of F1.
On that line, I do feel as if there is with all of these systems, there is positives. There are the positives and there are the negatives. But as I outlined the negatives, you can also say that if you know somebody like a Bottas knows he's not Hamilton. And I think Hamilton, vice versa, he knows that Bottas isn't up to it, should we say, as Rosberg was.
Bottas is a number 2 driver and he's nowhere near as good as Hamilton, yes.
Yeah, in that situation with Hamilton and Bottas, I think that, Bottas knows he's not up to it. And even though he wouldn't want to admit it, we can all admit that Rosberg was a better adversary for Hamilton.
Do you think an auction system could be really valuable to get F2 drivers in as well? Because say a team like Haas, Magnussen and Grosjean couldn't value themselves too high, and then if an F2 driver valued themselves a bit lower and put a lower price tag just to get into F1, it could provide an easier path to entry. Or like a Williams could take a chance on a really cheap F2 driver, the same way you can do in the F1 game, to save a bit of money and give someone a chance. Also, it could work with having both drivers on auction as well, so that you get rid of that whole one driver is better than the other thing, even though one driver is always better than the other. If you put both drivers on auction, it creates even more mess. Why not?
That's one way you can do it, I feel. But then it's sort of turmoil every year if you're going to put both drivers up for auction, because even if you want to retain one, then if you are technically putting both of them up for auction, then you're going to have to spend big bucks to retain both. And with the more popular drivers, or the ones that are more able, should we say, in terms of their abilities, such as the Verstappens and the Ricardos, I feel like if they're up for grabs every year with that double auction system, it could spice things up, but it would mean turmoil for the teams, and they would not know who who they actually, who we can bank on during this.
I think it would put an end to the whole driver team combination, like Schumacher 7 and Lewis Hamilton 7, Vettel's 4. Like those long spells of one driver and one team winning over and over again. I think you'd have different drivers and teams winning quite regularly.
Yeah, I think it would add it would definitely add a secondary excitement to it, a bit like in the transfer window in football. There's a second stream of excitement away from actually the game or the racing. And I think it obviously has its positives and negatives, but the problem is a team like Haas is if they auctioned, well, technically they're getting rid of both Grosjean and Magnussen, but if they auctioned them and no F2 drivers are particularly interested in joining Haas next year because they're not looking particularly attractive at the minute, then I think that would create a big problem for them.
I don't know. I think most F2 drivers just want to make it into Formula One. And once they make it into Formula One, then they can look at getting a good seat. Like Latifi, he just wanted a seat. So he went to Williams because they were giving him a seat. I don't think he was too worried about performance.
Yeah, you can tell that.
He won the F2 championship and then went to the slowest team in F1 just so that he could preserve his links to Mercedes for the future.
But in a couple of years, he hopefully will be at Mercedes. I'm just going off thinking about George Russell at Mercedes again. Back to the topic. Yeah, I do think there does need to be a second way that seat changes are done, because at the minute it's a bit, I don't know, I just think it needs a stream of excitement.
I do feel that if you're going to go for the rotation system, then there will be a lot more spending by Formula One teams to retain their drivers. And also, if you got to buy them at auction, it costs a lot more every year, whereas just offering them a set contract does. Because you're then offering them the contract as well as the auction fee. Whereas the buying aspect of it would sort of, I feel it would be problematic for the construction of the vehicle, because the amount of funding that they put towards the vehicle, that might have to be spent elsewhere, especially for the smaller teams, which may put them in an even worse position than they are, such as Williams.
But the financial regulations that are coming in, they can just add a driver salary cap or an auction cap to fix that now. And then even if Mercedes and Ferrari are both offering Hamilton 100 million, say, it then depends on the perks. Like Mercedes let Hamilton do his fashion line and stuff like that, which I can't see Ferrari letting him do. So then maybe he'd choose Mercedes over Ferrari in that.
But to what extent is, you can say, yeah, they can add it in, but do you really think they would add in that salary cap? Because that's, if you have a salary cap and you've got the likes of Hamilton, would he be, because he's the biggest asset in Formula One, would he be motivated to come? And I know the salary cap would be a relatively large amount, but if he could go for an even larger amount, I feel like his motivations with the current state of F1, with him dominating and looking for an 8th world championship, after that, if he's not being paid the right amount, I feel like he could just walk away from the sport, and F1 clearly don't want that to happen.
Well, we don't know if he is coming back to F1 next year at all, even now. It's not confirmed yet, so. But it could also, the other downside of this could be that, again, drivers like Hamilton, he's had so much input in development of Mercedes cars for himself and how he likes to drive, like they refuse to do it at McLaren, which is the next point we're going to talk about. But I think that would potentially end that. So it'd slow down development of cars for individual drivers.
Apparently, I'm not sure how much truth there is to this, but I read an article that Hamilton's contract at Mercedes is being slowed down by the fact that Mercedes is supporting a driver salary cap for the next set of regulations. So you would assume that if he does sign another contract and goes along with the driver salary cap now, then they could easily get it through for an auction. And with the drivers tuning their cars perfectly to themselves, doesn't it just mean that we'd get more out of drivers, and we wouldn't have situations like Albon and Gasly in the second Red Bull where they can't get to grips with a car that's so finely tuned to one driver. So we might get slower lap times, but we'd probably get better racing. And even an auction system, it could have helped, like McLaren, I feel, when they were with Alonso and they had to spend quite a lot of money on him. In an auction system, maybe that's an easy way for them to let him go and just be like, oh, we can't pay for you and another team's offering you more, so we'll just facilitate you leaving. Because I feel like Alonso did have a little bit to do with the fact that McLaren fell and then took a long time to get back up again.
We talk about McLaren's rise and fall and subsequent rise again in the past couple of years. From my memories as a young kid watching Formula One, McLaren used to be a brutal force, and they were only second to Red Bull in the championship during the early years of the previous decade, with the likes of Button and your Hamilton, who was an upcoming star, already having won one world championship. They were a force to be reckoned with and a mainstay at the top of the table. So it was quite sad to see the likes of Alonso and Button running around at the back of the grid when McLaren were at their lowest, and notably as their engine provider. Because despite the multiple world championships between Alonso and Button, they just couldn't get that car in a good enough position and struggled to even make the final qualifying sessions, which for a team that was at the top of Formula One displays that they just weren't able to move with the times in a sense, whereas the other teams like the Ferraris and Mercedes were able to move with the times. A similar thing could be said of Red Bull with after the departure of Vettel, and how they also had a downhill stretch before the likes of Ricciardo and Verstappen aided their revival. But in terms of McLaren, we have started to see a resurrection in their performances in the last few years, and the likes of Sainz and Norris, part of McLaren's progress, they have displayed that that car is able to run around at a quick speed, and in the hands of the right driver, it could be forced to reckon with in the next couple of years, I think.
I personally feel like Alonso had quite a big role to play in McLaren's downfall, not just because he joined the team and they went to the back of the grid more or less, but his actions and his media presence didn't help the team, didn't help the morale within the team and their relationship with Honda at all. And Honda have shown what they can do when they're with a team that's willing to listen to them and give them space to grow. What do you guys think about that? Raj?
Alonso publicly speaking out against the Honda engine didn't really help matters. But I do feel like that engine was so poor that as we saw, multiple world championships between them, but they still couldn't get towards the top of the grid, or even in the latter stage of the qualifying. So yeah, in terms of that, I feel like Alonso is not really to blame in that sense, but I feel like it was an amalgamation of several factors that led to that.
Well, Alonso probably didn't help himself or help the relationship with Honda by speaking out about their power unit being not powerful enough and unreliable. I mean, he was right, but he shouldn't have said it publicly, I don't think, because like we did see that as soon as McLaren lost Mercedes, suddenly they're at the back of the grid with a Honda power unit, and as soon as they dumped Honda in 2017, they're finishing fourth in the Constructors' Championship again. So I think Honda had a big role in them falling again as a team. Actually,
you say that, but when they got rid of Renault that first season still wasn't great. Alonso was still there, and that first season wasn't great until, funnily enough, Alonso left. Sainz and Norris came in, and they picked up again.
Yeah, personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't want to be attacked by F1 fans, but I do feel Alonso's finished now. I think Alonso's well past his best, and I don't think he should have come back to the sport. But we spoke about that in episode 2, so if you haven't already, listen back to episode 2 where we spoke about that. But yeah, I do think Alonso probably should have quit a few years ago, and I don't think he'd help McLaren drive forward as a team anyway.
Because it was the whole culture in that team at the time. It was like really serious and corporate, and then Alonso having tantrums on the team radio didn't help that. And as soon as they got 2 new young drivers in, changed the leadership up, changed their team colours, their approach, their media presence, and really tried to change the culture within the team, they seem to be having success. Now
Yeah,
that's enough of it.
and it was when they brought back Ron Dennis, because he's quite a sort of serious. I've seen him described as that sort of head teacher-like presence. I don't think that helped a team that really needed to sort of relax. That was a very tense.
They needed to move on, and he was very traditionalist.
Yeah.
So this is how we used to do things. But saying that, he did build the McLaren Technology Centre, and that place is about as modern as you can get.
But then, in everything in life, some people do a lot of good, but don't know when the right time is to move on. And I think that was just the case with that. I don't, think that he did anything wrong per se. I just think maybe he overstayed his welcome by a couple of years.
Where do you see McLaren going from now? To the top of the grid, or is this where they'll be for a couple of years, maybe until the 22 regulations?
I think now for where they're going to plateau, because Mercedes are too dominant at the minute. Red Bull and maybe Ferrari, if they improve next year, are going to be challenging Mercedes. I think the best that McLaren can do for now is sort of be the best of the midfield pack until at least the end of the Mercedes dominance era.
I feel like they're at a stage of equilibrium now where I feel like, they'll stay there for a couple of years. But do I see them going to the top of the grid? Probably not. I feel Ferrari will make a comeback due to just the finances that they have and the technical know-how that surrounds that team. I feel Mercedes' era of dominance will continue, at least until Hamilton is there. We will see if he's there next year. But I still feel that even with cumbersome drivers, should we say, in the sense of Bottas, I feel like, they'll still be a formidable force. And whoever goes into that second seat, if Hamilton does decide to, I feel that if Hamilton does decide to hang up his boots, they will go with a young driver to accompany the experienced Bottas. And
George Russell.
If they choose George Russell, I feel like, he could potentially be a world champion, because Bottas isn't the most potent of rivals, and they could advance Mercedes, that second Mercedes car, and overtake Bottas if Hamilton was to leave. But we have little idea about what's in his thoughts here. Akshar, over to you.
I really like George Russell. I think he's a really good driver. But just to get Yishan's reaction, I kind of hope that he doesn't get the Mercedes seat.
That would be brilliant.
Because Yishan would cry, wouldn't he?
It would, not to exaggerate, it would be the biggest injustice in F1 history.
The biggest. So not bigger than Senna Prost, Japan, last corner. Not bigger than Schumacher, Villeneuve. None of that matters. George Russell is the biggest.
Nothing will matter in comparison. Everything will be dwarfed in comparison if George Russell the world just won't be right if George Russell doesn't get a Mercedes seat at some point.
Not poor Vettel losing out at the Canadian Grand Prix on the last lap to Jenson Button. That was
That was
one of the best moments. To be fair, that was a good moment.
You can list anything in F1 history, and it won't be as big an injustice as that would be. But I think he's sort of very nailed on to get that seat. Everyone's talking about it, but I think it will happen.
But do you remember with Ocon as well? And Ocon was looking like he was nailed on to get the Mercedes seat if they were to drop Bottas, and he ended up out of F1.
I think, and some people may disagree with me, but I think George Russell is at the same stage a better driver than what Ocon was at the same stage.
When he was with Force India, I rated him higher than I rate Perez. But since his return, there's been nothing. Since he's come back into the sport, he's not proved that he deserves that seat, in my opinion. He's done exactly what Hulkenberg was doing anyways.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I'll go with that. But in terms of that second seat, do you not think that maybe Mercedes, do you think maybe Vettel might be in contention at some stage, if ever?
Mercedes?
Just throw it out, maybe.
No, I can't say that.
If it would have been now, but it's too late.
It would have been interesting.
He's a few years younger than Hamilton. He's still clearly got the drive to go for it and the fire in his belly, but I could see it happening.
For me, if Mercedes take Vettel now, then that is them announcing to the world that they're not in F1 for long term. They're just here for as long as they can dominate, and then they're going to leave afterwards. As soon as they stop dominating, they're just going to sell the team to someone else and leave, which I can also see happening.
But if we look at both drivers, Bottas isn't getting any younger either. If they were to have a complete reshuffle, as the auction system we were talking about, if they were to get rid of both of them, then who would be your choices? Ocon and Russell, or a more experienced duo like, say, potentially Perez and the likes of maybe a Verstappen? What do you think?
Itching for a Mercedes seat, but he's locked himself down in that Red Bull.
Has he though?
He's on a multi-year contract now.
But if Hamilton stays for another 2 years and Verstappen suddenly gets better and starts contending more, I feel like Mercedes could lure him away. And in that case, I feel like Red Bull might not be able to say no for an answer.
One driver I'd like to see in Bottas's seat. I don't know. It probably, if it was going to happen, would have happened a few years ago. But I think someone would push Lewis Hamilton more. And this is something we spoke about on Reddit. I would have liked to see, in anyway, Danny Ricciardo in that seat, because Danny Ricciardo is technically a much better driver than Bottas. I don't know, I just think mentality-wise, I think Danny Ricciardo has more of a winning mentality than what Bottas has. I think Bottas is happy to be that second driver and, finish second every week, or 14th last time. But I'd like to see, I think Danny Ricciardo would give Hamilton more of a challenge.
Every week, Bottas comes out with, I'll try to get him next week. And every season, it's Hamilton got the best of me this season, but I'm going to change my approach and come back. I have doubts that he is actually in F1 going for a championship. I think he's made his peace with the fact that while Hamilton's there, he's not getting a championship, and now he's just enjoying the ride.
Yeah, I don't think he's. I don't want to slate him, but I don't think he's much of a winner. I don't think he's like one of these people that's like a born winner and wants to win everything. As obviously to get to that level, to get to F1, he has to be. But I think since he's got to F1, I agree with what you said.
Do you feel after Hamilton retires, do you think Bottas is world championship material, just in spite of whoever gets that second seat? No.
No.
Despite his experience in the car, his experience in Formula One, he would be the main driver. Given that there would be a new driver coming, given that a new driver would be coming in, what do you think?
Well, if we take the season, with 3 races left, Hamilton has wrapped up the championship, Mercedes have wrapped up the constructors, and Bottas is yet to consolidate second place. Mathematically, Verstappen could still steal second place from him in a car that's a second clear of the field. Bottas can't get second place locked down earlier than this.
I think if Hamilton was to leave F1, I think Verstappen would see Bottas as there for the taking, because Bottas, I don't think Bottas could be the Mercedes main driver. I don't think he's capable of that. I think, again, as we said before, he's happy with being second, and I think him having to adjust himself to be wanting to be first every week and wanting to win every race, I just don't think he has it in him. And I think someone like Verstappen, who's a bit more aggressive, a bit more hungry, would see that as, there for the taking.
Well, we could go round and round in circles on this, and maybe that's why we should have an F1 driver market auction, because we wouldn't have to go round and round in circles. We just have to wait a year and everything gets shaken up. And with that, we'll end this week's podcast. Thanks for everyone that's tuned in. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the content, and subscribe if you want to listen to more.
And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at _LTF1_ and Instagram LTF1official. Again, thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe.